Mercedes and McLaren's front wing is going to be banned for 2025. Well, that's what Ferrari and Red Bull would love to happen if they can have their way with it. This comes even after the FIA put out a statement yesterday stating that the flexing levels on both the McLaren and Mercedes front wings for the 2024 season are within the parameters in which they are happy with. And so for the remainder of the season, they will be on both of those cars. But that doesn't mean this saga is over. Oh no, this is going to be a huge talking point for the remainder of not just this season, but as we head into 2025. And as you can imagine, with a widely perceived viewpoint from up and down the paddock that Mercedes' progress is largely in part this season due to the new front wing, which they brought back at Monte Carlo, there's a big reason behind why both Ferrari and Red Bull want this banished. But what is it exactly with this flexing on these two Formula One teams' front wings is making both Ferrari and Red Bull want to have it banned for next season? Well, it's all to do with the intricacies of the ground effect era in Formula One we are currently in. So essentially what is happening is all the Formula One cars are experiencing understeer in slow speed corners and oversteer in high speed corners. And what this front wing with the levels of flexing that the current Mercedes and McLaren have on theirs is allowing them to, in a sense, fine tune and balance the levels of understeer and oversteer in both of the respective slow and high speed corners. So it's, in a sense, making sure that the balance throughout the lap than that of what it would have been if they didn't have so much flexing. So what we see on both the McLaren and Mercedes is when the car is traveling at such high speed, the front wing is very much flexing under the load. So basically you'll see the front wing flapping like this. But when it comes into the slow speed corners, it then stiffens up and is very much planted and stable and doesn't have the flexing, and this is what has been engineered into their front wings. And both the Red Bull and Ferrari front wings do not have this level of intricacy introduced into theirs. And of course the second kind of issue with all of this is it would then mean both Ferrari and Red Bull would have to spend valuable resources, not only financially but in terms of CFD and the wind tunnel, to create their own versions of this front wing. And it would take away other avenues from which they potentially want to explore and create different kind of parts for next season. But before we go any further in with this video, I am looking to hit the 10,000 subscriber mark on the channel before the 2024 season has finished. So if you've enjoyed the video thus far and also want to be one of the first to know about some of the secrets Formula One teams are hiding, such as Mercedes' updated front suspension introduced in Austria, which I covered a whole 2 weeks before the official F1 channel, subscribe here now. And while it's very clear that both front wings are compliant within the regulations and therefore legal, there is going to be a lot more discussions between the teams and the FIA across the remainder of the season. And with the FIA still implementing the numerous checks with regards to the front wing up until the Singapore Grand Prix, this is being taken in essence to make sure that they have as much data across a wide variety of circuits. And even after Ferrari's win last weekend at Monza, team principal Fred Vasseur made a very clear point in the post-race press conference where he stated this: "This is a discussion that I do not want to have with you, being the journalists, but with Tom Bassis. There will be other discussions. The Federation has already communicated thus far to the teams its desire to not modify the current tests or introduce new ones in this current season. And now rivals are looking to push for a tightening of controls for the 2025 season, which could as well bank on a very heavy important point here, which is the very expensive technical battle for everyone which is currently going on in this cost era that we have with the limits placed on all the teams. And I think this is what the name of the game is. It's a technology which is going to require a lot of resource, not only in terms of finances, but also in terms of time within the wind tunnel and CFD models for each of the teams. And so Ferrari and of course Red Bull are looking to get ahead of this and not have to spend their resources on this particular aspect for next season, and instead focus on other areas, because it's going to leave them with a huge hole in terms of finances and what they can work on for their 2025 machinery. And of course there's a secondary caveat we have to place into that. All Formula 1 teams from the 2025 year, so the beginning of January the 1st, 2025, will then be allowed to start work on the 2026 generation of Formula 1 cars. So there's a lot of juggling to be done with all of the teams, and this is why I believe Ferrari and Red Bull want to make sure this level of flexing which is seen on the McLaren and Mercedes is banned for next season. Because this would mean that there's a loss of performance across those two teams, and of course it's going to bring them a lot closer to Red Bull and Ferrari. But also they're going to have to then spend more money and more resources on creating a brand new front wing to kind of come within the new technical regulations for front wings for 2025. So this saga is not going to be going anywhere for the foreseeable future. So this is a very, very interesting situation that Formula 1 and the teams find themselves in, because this can go two of ways and it can adversely affect one set of teams or not. So if Red Bull and Ferrari do get their way, then this means they have the advantage heading into 2025. They don't have to, on the one hand, spend time and resources on developing their own FLEXI front wing for that season, and instead they could just focus in on the other important aspects and areas of their respective cars for that year. But this of course then leaves the Mercedes and McLaren teams on the back foot, because then they, opposite and contrary to what the other two teams and the rest of the grid don't have flexi wings in this level of regard, they then have to scrap all of that work, invest more money, time, research into developing a wing which is not flexing as much as it previously was. But of course that is one particular outcome from this. Now let's talk about the other one. So say Ferrari and Red Bull are not successful. This means Mercedes and McLaren, they can continue just with the front wing as it is and maybe tweak it for 2025 to go with the rest of the car as they design it. But this has a negative effect on both Red Bull and Ferrari, and it's the total opposite once again. They then have to spend money, time and resources on developing a particular front wing which is much more flexible in the high and slow speed corners, very much like what Ferrari, Mercedes and McLaren have done. And so this has then taken away money and time and effort from other areas which they could potentially have bigger gains from. So this is a very fine-edged sword in play currently with regards to this flexi wing for 2025. How this goes is going to be very interesting and should have quite an impact on what happens with both championships next season. But that, my friends, is where I'm going to wrap the video up. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, do of course leave a like on it and subscribe down below if you've enjoyed the content and haven't done so thus far. Right guys, I will catch you all in another Formula 1 video later in the week.